Well, let's get more on our top story this evening, that historic agreement between the leaders of North and South Korea to rid their countries of nuclear weapons and, in the process, bring about a lasting peace. Can this new relationship between the two sides really bring to an end the regular nuclear missile tests we've seen out of North Korea over the past few years? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Washington by the former US ambassador to South Korea, Alexander Vershbow, and from Los Angeles by the former chair of the US National Intelligence Council, Gregory Treverton. Many thanks, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador, to you first. We have seen agreements between the North and the South in the past. We have seen diplomatic progress made. How confident are you that what was agreed today in the DMZ is going to last beyond the end of the week?
Well, when it comes to the normalization of relations between the North and the South, I'm relatively optimistic. I think this was a bit different from the previous inter-Korean summits in 2007 and in the one before that they seem genuinely ready to get on a different path for the two Koreas and to really put an end to hostility. What is less clear is whether this really means anything new regarding denuclearization. We've heard similar promises before. There's no definition of denuclearization in this agreement. And in the past, some of the formulas that we see in today's declaration have signaled an effort to drag out the process, to link it to unacceptable conditions, such as the withdrawal of all American troops. So I think we need to know more before we can say that this is a real breakthrough on the nuclear issue.
Mr. Treverton, I'm sure you've seen the pictures. President Moon is either a fantastic actor or he is hugely pleased with the progress that has been made today. I mean, do you share his optimism that actually we might be seeing at the beginning of the process, I should say, of denuclearization and an end to the saber rattling, which has really come to typify the North Korean interaction with the rest of the world?
Well, it's at least a beginning. You know, it's been so bad for so long that even a hopeful sign is good. I think Sandy's exactly right. We're a long way from home on denuclearization, exactly what the North means by that, given that they regard their very existence as depending on having nuclear weapons. Time will tell. But I think this is a good sign. It's a good beginning. It's only that. And President Moon understands that as well. I mean, he understands that he's involved in this complicated two-level game with North Korea on the one hand, but also serving as a kind of intermediary or mediator between the North and the United States. So it's at least a beginning, and since we haven't had a really good news on this score since the 1990s and the agreed framework, it's at least something that offers some promise.
But Mr. Treverton, do we think that Kim Jong-un is himself insulated still from the possibility of regime change? I mean, certainly no Western leader will talk about it, and it's likeliest to come from within. But does he feel that by engaging in this process of détente that he makes his position more or less secure?
I think he probably does. Obviously, what he cares most about is the regime and his own personal survival. And wisely, we haven't talked about regime change. Something might happen internally, unpredictable. He's a man whose two favorite habits seem to be drinking and driving, so he may take himself out of the game at some point. But no, I think so, and I think he feels like at this point he's played the nuclear card. We'll see how he plays it in the future. It's hard for me to imagine he's going to give up nuclear weapons entirely, because they are so critical, he feels, to his survival. But I think he feels like he's gone far enough along that path so he can now begin to engage a bit more normally with both the South and with us.
Ambassador, I mean, if the North Koreans are to be taken in good faith and do demonstrate that, I mean, what do we imagine that Kim Jong-un wants in return for all this?
Well, I think he wants to see an early lifting of the economic sanctions, which have been much tougher since President Trump came in, with some useful help from the Chinese as well. And so they're hurting his economy, and I think that does make him feel vulnerable to internal pressures for regime change. But President Trump has also been quite clear, including just today, that he's not going to relieve the pressure until we actually see concrete action on denuclearization, not just some kind of nebulous declaration about moving towards that goal over some period of years, but he wants some quick results. So it's not yet clear if there's going to be a meeting of the minds when we have this U.S.-North Korean summit in the next couple of months. Hopefully the diplomacy between now and then will clarify what's going to happen so we don't go in with completely contrary expectations and have a breakdown.
Yeah, indeed, Ambassador, I mean, as you well know, so much of the progress in diplomatic terms happens ahead of the summit proper. But what do you see as Donald Trump's role in all of this moving forward?
Well, as I said, he's been, I think, successful in mobilizing an international coalition embodied in very strong UN Security Council resolutions to tighten the noose on the North Korean economy much more than has ever been done before. And this got their attention, as did his saber rattling. Made people very nervous in the United States, but it may have scared the hell out of the North Koreans and the Chinese. So I think we've got them negotiating more seriously than was the case under the Obama administration. I say that not as any great fan of President Trump. So I think he has a great opportunity now, President Trump, to capitalize on this. The big question mark remains just how serious are the North Koreans? Because, as Greg said, keeping at least some of their nuclear weapons has been viewed as the ticket to the survival of the regime. They look at what happened to Gaddafi and to Saddam Hussein, and they are clearly going to be very reluctant to give those up if they can avoid it.
Mr. Treverton, I was listening to the press conference being given by the US President and the German Chancellor, and of course, in their discussions, Iran was likely to come up. But there is an interesting juxtaposition, isn't there, between the situation in North Korea, where they have tried to achieve nuclear weapons and seem to have been successful in that regard to get their place at the international table. The Iranians have been doing exactly the same thing, and all they have achieved is the opprobrium of the entire Western world.
Yes, it is interesting. It's an interesting contrast, I think. You know, the Iranians have a different strategic setting, and so their interest is different. But I think they don't feel like the regime is in immediate danger in the way that North Korea does. So they've had a different set of incentives. And, you know, they want to be a major player. And so it's not clear, I think. It's clear if you're North Korea that probably having nuclear weapons is good for your survival. If you're Iran, it's not plainly obvious that having nuclear weapons are good for your influence in the region. You may just end up setting off more reactions by the Saudis, the Turks, and others than is valuable.
Ambassador, we are, as we say, a country mile from any serious talk about the unification of the Korean Peninsula. At the same time, whilst the United States, the United Kingdom, the West really wants to put the pressure on and get that process of denuclearization started, there are other powers, aren't they, who would want to do anything within their power to ensure that the unification of the Koreas remains even more than a distant prospect?
Well, I think that's true today. I mean, if there's an evolution towards a much more stable relationship between the two Koreas, then China, which I think prefers a divided peninsula, may ease its opposition. And I don't think the Russians have a strong stake either if it is an outcome in which there isn't any further buildup of U.S. forces in the region. So a lot of this is tied to the U.S. more than it is to the two Koreas. I think the bigger question for me, having lived in South Korea for 3 years, is do the South Korean people really want to pay the price for unification? West Germany paid a very heavy price to absorb East Germany, and people say that for the South to absorb the North or to merge into some kind of joint state would be 10 times more expensive. So there's interestingly not that much enthusiasm on the streets of Seoul, as you might expect for what just happened today. People are a little bit wary about what this might mean for their pocketbooks.
Indeed. Gentlemen, you've been referring to each other by your first names. I will remain formal. Ambassador Vershbow, Mr. Treverton, many thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you.